So can you tell me how you got into wine? What was your kind of earliest memory and what brought you into the world of wine?
I remember tasting some very good wines when I was a teenager, but my family were not regular wine drinkers, and university was a question of quantity more than quality. And I really got into wine by accident, which I think is true of an awful lot of people, in the sense that I was doing a lot of writing for the New Statesman in the early mid-'80s, and they had a Christmas issue and they wanted something festive. So I wrote something on Portuguese food and wine, about which I knew just about zero, apart from what I bought at the local Oddbins, which had quite a good selection of oxidized Portuguese wines. Anyway, the following year they asked me to do the same thing again, so I wrote about Sauterne. And that turned into a column. So I forget when that was, 84, 85. So I had a column, I think it was every 3 months. And then what happened was they did a survey of readers and discovered that the average subscriber drank about 3 bottles a day. So they thought they'd better have a monthly wine column. So that's what I was doing, and I started traveling in order to gather material and going on press trips and all the other things that we writers do. And that continued for a couple of years, and then, as often happens, editor left, change of direction, blah, blah, blah. And then I started writing for Vogue, which was a treat because they actually paid expenses, which I've never heard of before. And so I travelled again a lot for them. I wasn't their only wine writer. Rosemary George was another one, but I probably did more than anybody else. And that was great fun. And I slowly started writing for Wine magazine, which no longer exists, and for Decanter. I suppose the breakthrough, if you want to call it that, in this limited world of wine was my book Liquid Gold, which was on sweet wines. And that came out in '87, and it won a prize, which is very nice, but it sort of put me on the map a bit. And so from there, my sort of wine writing built up. I started writing other books on wine and writing, obviously, more articles.
Excellent. Interesting. And before wine writing, you worked in publishing. I'm interested to know your experience, how it differed from working in the publishing world in the US and here in the UK.
I didn't work at a particularly senior level in the US. I was, I think, editorial director of a very small publishing house. And I also worked for a magazine, for the Atlantic Monthly, but at sort of a lowly level. But when I came back to England, which was in, 76, I was an academic editor, which meant traveling to universities, keeping up with authors that were already contracted and adding new ones to the roster. And I was expected to publish or edit about 60 books a year, which is a book a week. So it was quite, I didn't always achieve that, but I was at liberty to sign up lots of people, at liberty to travel a lot. I went to the States, went to Paris to meet the great thinkers of the day, like Derrida. But also part of it was I had to entertain. I had to take people out to lunch and sometimes dinner, and I really needed to learn a bit more about wine. So I bought Michael Broadbent's big tasting book and sort of looks at I knew the wine list of the restaurants that I habituated and sort of checked up on what he rated well, and would order those wines with lunch, and so gradually I built up more knowledge as well.
Excellent. And what was the greatest lesson that you've learned as a writer, as an author of books? What's been your kind of greatest takeaway? Tough question.
Yeah, do the work. Do the work. By which I mean, if you're writing about a place, you need to go there. You need to talk to people. You need to wander through the vineyards. You need to talk to the winemakers as well as the owners when that's possible. You need to talk to the consultants. That way you build up a body of knowledge that you can use both for whatever it is you're working on at that moment, but also for future projects. And there are some lazy people out there who don't really do the homework, and I think it shows in what they write. I'm not going to name any names, of course, at least not until you switch that off. And so I think that's the main thing. I mean, take it seriously. I know wine is a frivolous thing. It's just a drink. People shouldn't, going to raptures about it's a wonderful art form and all the rest of it. But take it seriously, even though we're not talking about major political issues or anything like that.
Excellent, that's interesting. And so you mentioned your first book was on sweet wines. I'd like to get your kind of perspective over the trend or the downward trend of sweet wines. And do you think there'll be a revival anytime soon?
No, I just don't see it. I mean, I've been following this now for over 30 years. So I wrote or researched that book and wrote it about 32 years ago now. And a lot of people adore those wines. A small band of people, often in the wine trade or wine collectors or whatever, who do buy them on a regular basis and enjoy them and serve them. But for the great public, wherever it is, whether it's in France or in this country or the United States, it's just completely off the map. I remember, this was about 20 years ago, the owner of a second growth in Sauternes told me that he'd sold from the current vintage 1 case of wine to the negociants, 12 bottles. And he made pretty good wine, not the best, but pretty good. So it's always been a tremendous struggle. And Alexandre de Lure-Salus, the former owner of Château d'Yquem and present owner of Château de Fargue, said the problem is that with a property like Yquem, it's a national monument. So people may have a bottle, but they're not going to open it. They'll worship it, put it in the in a cupboard, put it on a shelf, but people are not in the habit of drinking these wines. And people don't promote them well. Often they're made in tiny quantities. So, like a German TBA, you've got 200 half bottles, so what are you going to do? You're going to open them for important guests, drink them at Christmas or whatever. It's hardly a commercial market. The Austrians have been a lot better than most at marketing those wines. Tokai, I don't know. Everybody reveres the wines. There's some wonderful wines being made, but I have no idea who buys them. The cheap stuff used to go to Russia, but it was undrinkable. So, no, I think it's very difficult. I mean, there are areas like the Loire Valley, Côte de Léon, Bonzo, produce stunning sweet wines. Again, don't know who drinks them. So I don't think that's going to change. I can't see some great renaissance in sweet wine production. Some people will give up. You see it in Sauternes at the moment. There are estates, first growths, that have cut back by a half to 2/3 their production of sweet wine and are focusing much more on dry white wines. And from their point of view, it does make sense. And they're still producing great sweet wine, but in more manageable, more saleable quantities. So that's probably the way that people will go. You see it in Tokai as well, where people are producing more dry fourment and much less of the ozu, the sweet wines. So that is, if that's a direction forward, it's not a bad one, because the wine is still there for them who wants it, and for the vast majority that don't, there's another product on the market.
And another region that you've been a champion of that might be seen as slightly untrendy is Germany.
Yes.
How have you seen the kind of perception of German wines change in the UK market?
I think it has improved. You've had prestigious importers, whether Ley and Wheeler, not so much now, but Justine and Brooks. You have a wine barn. You have David Motion at the winery. People who are nuts about these wines and bring them in. And Sebastian Thomas at Howard Ripley is another one. And they recognise the quality of these wines, and they're not expensive. I just bought. Okay, they were bin ends, but I think it was 20 bottles of really good German wine, admittedly at the sort of cabinet level, for about, well, it was just under 200 quid, including delivery. So the wines are not expensive. And they do have a following, and that following, I think, is increasing. But I think what we're seeing is more of a Riesling revival than the German Riesling revival. So I think the wines from the Wachau, more fashionable Australian Riesling is doing well, I think. So I don't think it's ever going to be a mighty explosion. But I mean, Austrian Riesling is doing well. They don't produce a huge amount. They produce mostly Grüne Veltliner. They produce Rieslings of high quality. People know it and seek them out. So, so I mean, other German wine style, red wines, which are of increasing quality. I remember going to cooperatives in Baden in the south and asking to taste their Pinot Noir. So they would bring out 30 bottles. There'd be the Cabinet, the Cabinet Haupttrocker, the Cabinet Lieblich, then there'd be the Spätlese, ditto, then there'd be a couple of single vineyard wines, then the whole series again as Weisherbst, in other words, as rosé. So from their holdings, which were not enormous, on 20 hectares, they would produce 30 wines. It was nuts. It was nuts. I said, why are you doing this? They said, well, Herr Müller in the village, 2 miles down the road, he loves our rosé. So we always have a few cases for him and so. But that was no marketing strategy. That's changed now. There's some really serious German Pinot Noir producers like Stodden and the R who came top at a decanter, anything but Burgundy tasting, about 5 years ago. And then there's Fürst and Frank. So there are lots of other German wine styles that are catching on, and people are aware of them.
Excellent. And what are the other regions that are really exciting you at the moment? If you were to pick one, that you're really actively following and enjoying the wines of?
Italy is always exciting because of the regional traditions, and wherever you go, you've got different wine styles, different personalities. You have a sort of super class of rich nobles or Milanese textile magnates or whatever who can afford to buy good properties, invest in them, and make sure that the wine is of high quality. So there's a lot of that going on, and then in complete contrast, you've got the sort of the peasants, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but the people who from generation to generation, that has been their living. People like Quintarelli and his Amarone in the Veneto, and there are many, many other examples. And these people make fabulous wines. So there's a wealth of great wine, and you're not limited to a small varietal band. In South Africa, I'm not denigrating South African wines. A lot of them are very good value. But it's basically Shiraz, Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinotage. In Italy, the range is colossal, and there are interesting things to find in all parts of the country, and quality in areas that used to make fairly miserable wines, such as Sicily, have improved beyond measure.
Excellent. My last question is what are you working on? What's next? What's your next chapter?
Well, I'm continuing to write articles, mostly for Decanter. I do stuff for Fine Wine magazine as well. I don't have a new book in the works. I think it's getting more and more difficult for book projects. They're expensive, but I think the main reason is simply the accessibility of the internet. With Google, I do it myself. If I go to a tasting and I want to know more about a wine that I've tasted, I just Google it. Admittedly, the information is not always reliable on websites, and of course, wineries out to promote their own wines. But nevertheless, a lot of people are not going to be carrying around a book on Bordeaux that weighs 2 kilos. They may have it as an e-book, or they, as I say, may just use their iPhones or whatever. So I think it's getting more and more difficult for people to earn any kind of living by writing mammoth books. I hope that's not true. I hope there'll be a new generation of people who will come along and find new things to write about. But I think there's going to be an inexorable decline.
Unfortunately so. Thank you very much.
Welcome.